Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Wheel and Wilderness Workshop. In our last video, we discussed the suspension mods and upgrades that I did to my Tacoma hunting truck. And this week, I wanted to discuss 3 or 4 other mods that I did to my truck that I feel are just as important and added a lot of off-road worthiness to my vehicle. But before I go and discuss those things, I want to discuss something else and put some of my decisions into perspective. And that is the weight rating and capacity of the Tacoma. If you look at the sticker on the Tacoma, there is only about 945 pounds of additional capacity that the Tacoma can handle. Now, if you think about that, 945 pounds is really nothing. If I were to take 3 of my 6-foot hunting buddies that are 225, 250 each, on top of myself, we are pretty much at that weight rating already. So I would venture to guess that 95% or more of the overlanding trucks and Tacomas out there that are built up are overweight and over the weight rating of the Tacoma. So knowing that, and knowing that I would probably reach that point also, I tried to be as weight conscious as possible. So having that in mind, let's talk about some of the additional mods that I did. One of the additional mods that I knew I was going to have to do to my truck in order for it to be off-road worthy and to be able to handle the trails that I was taking it out on when we were hunting was a full set of skid plates. Now, I had a dilemma when I was deciding about the skid plates because these are really just big metal plates. They're heavy. They add a lot of weight. And there were really 2 options. There was steel, which of course is super heavy, and there was aluminum. And aluminum was of course a lot lighter than steel, but aluminum has some of its own issues. So let's discuss some of those. While aluminum is lighter, it is nowhere near as strong as steel. It is more likely to bend and warp, and I knew this. The other thing about aluminum is that it tends to be a little bit more catchy than steel, meaning that if steel were to hit an obstacle, it is more likely to slide off of that obstacle. Since aluminum is soft, it is more likely to become gouged, and for instance, a sharp rock is more likely to gouge it and have the aluminum plate stick on the rock as opposed to slide off of it like steel. So knowing these 2 things, I had to make a very important decision. Do I go with steel or do I go with aluminum? And being that I was trying to be extremely weight conscious with all of my decisions, I decided to go with aluminum. Now, thus far on my hunting trip this year, the aluminum performed fine. But then again, I didn't really bash it against a whole bunch of rocks like it might ultimately happen. So did I make the right decision at the end of the day? I think from a weight perspective, I made the right decision. However, I'm not sure that from a durability perspective, it's going to last. And the only way to know is to keep using it and to find out. So what did I end up getting? I ended up purchasing the RCI aluminum plates, skid plates for my Tacoma. Now, why did I go with RCI? The reason I went with RCI is because it was in stock. It was recommended by many people. They liked their RCI products. It was priced right, it was on sale, and they had aluminum as an option for me instead of going with steel. And the 5th thing was that RCI offered an option with their skid plates that not everybody did. Now, that was the option to get skid plates that were completely flat underneath. If you look at the options on RCI's website, you will notice that there are 2 different options for your skid plates. Right around where the transmission is or the transfer case, there is an exhaust pipe that goes underneath your truck and is actually the lowest point on your Tacoma. Now, if you don't do an exhaust modification, then you get the regular skid plates that allow for that bump to be there, but that is also something else that can catch up on your vehicle when going over rocks or obstacles. Or the other option is to go with the flat skid plates, but in order to do that, you need to get an exhaust modification done. So I went out and I went ahead and I got the exhaust modification done before I ordered my skid plates. Now, the exhaust modification is very simple. They just straighten out the pipe and bring it over at a different point instead of going underneath the transfer case. And it really isn't an expensive modification either. It will probably cost you anywhere from $100 to $250, depending on the shop and who you find to do it and their experience in knowing how to do it. Once I had the exhaust modification done, I ordered the flat skid plates from RCI, and I now have those in place along with the gas tank skid plate also. The next mod that I wanted to discuss was rock rails. Now, I knew that I was going to be taking my truck out on some pretty rough roads, and I knew that in the future I wanted to do some overlanding with my truck. So I decided that it was very important that I had a set of rock rails to protect the undercarriage of my truck from any damage. I also knew that I wanted to support some local companies, so I found a local company that designs and builds their own rock rails. It's called Westcott Designs. They're up in northern Phoenix. They're very well known in the four-wheel off-road community. I ordered a set of rock rails from them, and since I was also bumping up against my hunting trip, which was coming up very soon, I had them install it also when they were ready. Now, these rock rails are TIG welded. They are top of the line. In fact, you can lift up the whole vehicle with a lift just using the rock rails on the sides. So these are solid rock rails. I know I'm not going to go wrong with them, and I love the way they look. The third upgrade that I want to discuss were rims and tires. I knew that in order to get a little bit more clearance for my truck, I wanted to go with larger tires. But I also knew that I didn't want to go too crazy with the modifications and tear my whole truck apart. So the sweet spot in there was going with 33-inch tires. I also knew that I wanted to get the Falken Wild Peak AT4W tires, the new ones that had just come out. I had heard really good things about them. Not so good in the snow, but off-road, very good. I'm in Arizona, not too much snow here unless I go up north, which is a possibility, but really not something I do too often. So I really like the idea of going with the Falkens. So my next decision was in deciding what size rims I go with. I already knew that I wanted to get the SCS Ray 10 rims. I love the look of those. I had seen them on some other trucks out on the web and decided that those were the rims for me. They came in a 16-inch and a 17-inch size, and I had to decide between those two. Now, here's what I found. There weren't a lot of choices in AT tires for 16-inch rims. Now, more and more choices were popping up, but at the time that I had purchased, there was really only one choice in all terrains, and that was the Falken Wild Peak. They had just come out with the AT4W in the 16-inch 255, 85 R7 or R16 size, and I was looking at those tires, and those were C-rated. I was also looking at the Falken Wild Peaks, which were 255 80 R17s. Now, they're effectively the same exact tire size. The only difference is one goes on a 16-inch rim and is C-rated, and the other one goes on a 17-inch rim and is E-rated. Now, I was concerned about going with the E rating because I thought it might make the tire a little too harsh in driving around day to day. But I also did like the idea of having an E-rated tire out on the trails that I was on, because if you know anything about northern Arizona, it's made up of volcanic rock that is very sharp. So having the E-rated tires, I felt, just gave me a little bit more protection out on those trails. The other thing I liked about the 17-inch rims was choice. There was a lot more choice out there for all-terrain tires. Should I decide down the line that I wanted to go with a different brand or a different tire type, I would have had much more choice with the 17-inch rims than I would with the 16-inch rims. Now, I think that's changing over time. More and more companies are putting out all-terrain tires for the 16-inch rim size. However, at the time that I was purchasing, there was a lot more choice in 17-inch, so I ended up going with the 17-inch. So all in all, what were the mods that I did to my truck to make them more off-road worthy in addition to the suspension? That was a full set of skid plates, front to back from RCI in aluminum. Did I make a mistake? Maybe. Only time will tell. We'll find out as I bash them up. The second was adding a set of rock rails from Westcott Designs here in Northern Phoenix. TIG welded, strong as hell, can lift the whole truck up from the rock rails themselves, so I really love them. And the third was a new set of rims and tires that gave me just a little bit more clearance. We moved up to 33s. I went with the SCS Ray 10s for the rims and Falken Wild Peak AT4Ws in the 255 80 R17 size. That's all for this week's video. Thanks for joining us here at Wheel and Wilderness Workshop.